Kenneth, you had a question.
I was just going to, because Jeremy raised communal tensions, but I think PAP continue to exploit the issue of communal tension, and they've deliberately stoked the issue so as to maybe keep the majority race, the Chinese, in fear of the Islamic menace, and that's one of the ways they've maintained their hold on power, by scaring. Would you agree with that?
In Malaysia?
No, in
Singapore. He's asking that they use the fear of the Malays and Muslims to keep the Chinese compliant, right? By creating Malays and Muslims as a bogeyman.
I don't think so.
No?
No.
Yes.
Perhaps even under this half light, you can possibly see that I come from a colonialist background. But by way of excuse, I can actually say I was born in Indonesia and spent 3.5 years of my life there. I know a little about Singapore and Malaysia. Can I ask both you historians why it is that if the base in Singapore was so important up to a particular time, why the British didn't do what they did in Cyprus, or the Americans do what they have done in Guantanamo Bay, and simply defined an area of Singapore, even an area in Malacca, the Straits Colonies, or Penang, as being a sovereign British territory? Why did they not think of that? Do you have an explanation for that? Where they could have said, this bit of the Straits territory, whatever it be, Singapore, Malacca, or Penang, will be a sovereign British territory, as they are now in Guantanamo Bay and in Cyprus.
Did you hear that?
And Gibraltar, perhaps.
Yeah.
Why not? I
you wanna
can't see
answer
why
that,
they
or
didn't
should
do
I?
that. Perhaps it's a difficult
I mean,
question.
they couldn't do it, right? Because I think because the desire for independence was too great. I mean, they couldn't control the population. I mean, they thought that Lee Kuan Yew could control the population for them. But Lee Kuan Yew lost out in the by-elections. He didn't want to help the unions. He didn't want to release detainees. And the people just lost faith in him. And therefore, he lost the election, and he lost both elections. And Selkirk told him he would lose. I mean, and that was the sea of hostile local population. So the British could not give Singapore independence, because that would defeat their purpose at that time. So they had to decide between Singapore under their direct control, or something which is not as good, but by treaty with Tunku. And they chose by treaty with Tunku. Yeah.
If I can just add, the port was heavily dependent on local workers, and I don't think you could have carved out any sort of sovereign area without facing the question of who works in that sovereign area, right? Who is going to, service the port? And the blue-collar workers were heavily left-wing, and the British had huge issues with their trade union, which was led by Jamit Singh, right? Who led the naval base union
under Woodhull, yeah. Woodhull.
Yes, and Woodhull, yeah. So even if you carve out this area, and Singapore is very tiny, much smaller than it is today, right? Because we've increased our land 1/3 since independence. Who supplies it? Who works in it? There's a huge logistical question there that needs to be addressed. So I don't think it would have been physically possible, let alone politically possible, because of course Singapore had, a huge thirst for independence, and was its population were very left wing, as Dr. Po was saying.
What's interesting, possibly now, if you fast forward, is the extent to which Singapore is now used by the United States as a military beachhead. As many know, the naval visits and the naval presence of the United States in Singapore is enormous. It's both in number and presence. And Singapore has a larger defense budget and spending than any other Southeast Asian nation. It would be very interesting to see the extent to which those facts are known by the Singapore population in general and what they think about that, because their future is increasingly tied to somebody else's military and strategic interest. You could make the case. It's a little bit of an echo, if you take what Mr. So says, of 40, 50 years ago.
Okay,
No, he's saying the Singapore is now heavily tied to the American naval presence in Singapore. And just to add, as a naval reservist, I can tell you there's a whole chunk of Singapore that is entirely American. It's like, that section, it's like the green zone in Baghdad. No one talks about it. And I don't know if the media never reports about it. We're not allowed inside it, but it's there, and it services the American Navy, and Americans live there almost year round. But I don't think most Singaporeans know about it. I don't think we never discuss it.